I've been working at St. Marian's for 11 years now. Not as a doctor, not as a nurse. I'm a facilities coordinator, which is a polished way of saying I handle the building when it breaks, which it does, constantly, because St. Marian's was built in 1971 and expanded twice since then, and nothing lines up the way it should. The plumbing in the third floor doesn't match the plumbing in the second floor. The HVAC system runs on 3 separate units that were never meant to talk to each other. Half the thermostats in the building are decorative at this point. I know which ones actually work. I know which ones are just screwed into the wall to make people stop complaining. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that I know this building. Not the way a patient knows it, not even the way a doctor knows it. I know it the way you know a house you've lived in too long. I know which lights flicker before they die. I know which elevator makes a grinding noise on the way down from 4 but runs fine going up. I know which doors don't latch unless you lift and push at the same time. I know the smell of each floor, the antiseptic sharpness of the surgical wing, the stale warmth of long-term care, the vaguely metallic air near radiology. I know where the building breathes and where it holds still. And I know the East Wing, or I knew it, I should say, before they closed it. The East Wing was the oldest part of the hospital. It was the original structure, actually, the 1971 build, back when St. Marian's was just a regional medical center with maybe 40 beds. The rest of the hospital grew around it and away from it. And by the time I started working there, the East Wing was already showing its age. The floors were that old composite tile, beige and brown in a checkerboard no one would choose today. The ceiling panels were the soft, porous kind that absorb moisture and sag. The windows were single pane, and in winter you could feel the cold bleeding through them from 6 inches away. It had its own nurse station on each of its 2 floors, its own small waiting area near the entrance, and a set of fire stairs at the far end that opened onto the back parking lot. For most of my time at St. Marian's, the East Wing was used for overflow. When the main wards filled up during flu season, or when there was a bad accident on the highway and we needed extra beds, patients would get routed into the East Wing. It wasn't ideal. The rooms were smaller. The lighting was harsh, and the heating was unreliable. But it worked. Nurses didn't love being assigned there because of the walk, because the East Wing connected to the rest of the hospital through a single long corridor on the first floor, what we called the connector hall. It was maybe 150 feet long, fluorescent lit, no windows, with a fire door at each end. Going to the East Wing always felt like leaving the hospital and entering somewhere else. The air changed. The sounds changed. Even the way your footsteps echoed was different, because the corridor had that old tile and the ceiling was lower. They closed the East Wing about 2.5 years before the events I'm going to describe. The official reason was infrastructure. The county did an assessment and found issues with the electrical, or with the fire suppression system, with asbestos and some of the ceiling material. All real problems. All things I'd been flagging in my reports for years. The cost to bring it up to code was more than the hospital wanted to spend, especially since patient volume had been declining anyway. Small town hospital, aging population, younger people moving to the city. The math didn't work. So they closed it. They didn't demolish it. They didn't renovate it. They just closed it, locked the fire doors on both ends of the connector hall, put up signage, rerouted the phone extensions, cut the active power to most of the wing, but left the emergency lighting on a separate circuit because code required it, even for an unoccupied structure still attached to an active hospital. The elevators that serviced the East Wing were locked out at the main panel. Sick at the fire stairs at the far end were chained from the inside and alarmed from the outside. And that was it. The East Wing just sat there, connected to the hospital the way a dead limb is connected to a body, still part of the structure, still on the blueprints, still showing up in the building management system, but closed, dark, empty. For 2.5 years, I barely thought about it. I had enough to deal with in the parts of the hospital that were still running. There was always a boiler acting up, a roof leak, a broken bed rail, a call light that wouldn't reset. The East Wing was off my list. If something failed in there, it wasn't my problem. That was the understanding. I should tell you about my schedule because it matters. At the time of all this, I was working a rotating shift that included 2 overnight stretches per week, but usually Tuesday and Thursday, 10 in the evening to 6 in the morning. Overnight facilities coverage. Mostly I sat at a small desk in the basement mechanical room near the boiler plant, monitoring the building management system on a terminal that was at least 15 years old. If something flagged, a temperature alarm, a water flow alert, a power fluctuation, I'd go check it. Some nights I'd make 2 or 3 rounds. Other nights, I'd sit there for 8 hours and do nothing but drink bad coffee and listen to the boilers cycle on and off. The hospital at night is a different place than the hospital during the day. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. I mean it practically. During the day, there are hundreds of people moving through the building. Patients, families, staff, delivery drivers, volunteers. The hallways are alive. There's noise, there's motion. There's a kind of human density that makes the building feel like what it is. A place where people come and go. At night, that's gone. The main entrance locks at 9. Visiting hours end at 8. The cafeteria closes at 7. What's left is the skeleton crew. The night nurses on each active floor, a couple of techs, the overnight lab staff, 1 or 2 hospitalists on call, security, and me. The hallways empty out. The lights in the public areas dim to half. The elevators still run, but you can wait 3-4 minutes sometimes because the system slows them down during low-use hours to save energy. The intercom goes quiet except for occasional overhead pages that always sound too loud in the silence. Code calls, pharmacy requests, the things that can't wait. I was used to it. I'd been doing it for years. The hospital at night didn't scare me. It was just the building with fewer people in it. The sounds it made were mechanical, explainable. The HVAC cycling on, pipes expanding and contracting. The ice machine on the second floor dumping a load every 40 minutes with a sound like muffled thunder. The parking structure elevator, which was ancient and made a high-pitched whine that you could hear through the walls if you were in the right part of the basement. I'm telling you all of this because I want you to know that I am not someone who gets spooked by an empty hospital. I'm not someone who hears a noise in a dark hallway and starts thinking about ghosts. I've spent hundreds of nights in that building. I know what it sounds like when it's working, and I know what it sounds like when something is wrong. So the first time was a Tuesday in November. I remember because it had been raining for 3 days, and we had a minor leak in the radiology suite that I'd been nursing with plastic sheeting and buckets. I was in the mechanical room, probably around 1 in the morning, and my desk phone rang. This wasn't unusual. The desk phone rang maybe 2 or 3 times a night on average. Usually it was a nurse calling about a room that was too hot or too cold. Sometimes it was security asking me to check on a door alarm. I picked up. There was no one on the line. Not silence exactly. There was the open line hum you get on an internal call, that faint electronic hiss that tells you the connection is live. But no voice, no background noise. Nothing. I said hello a couple of times, waited maybe 10 seconds, and hung up. It happens. Internal phone systems are old. Extensions get crossed. Someone dials the wrong number, realizes it, hangs up, but the line takes a moment to clear. I didn't think about it. The phone rang again about 20 minutes later. Same thing. Open line, no voice. This time I checked the caller ID display on the phone, which was a small LCD screen that usually showed the extension number of the calling line. It showed 4012. I didn't recognize it immediately. Our extensions follow a pattern. The first digit is the floor. The second digit identifies the wing or department, and the last two are the specific phone. So 4012 would be 4th floor, wing 0, phone 12. But we don't have a wing 0. The main building uses wing designations 1 through 3. Wing 1 is the north corridor, wing 2 is the south, wing 3 is the central hub. There is no wing 0. Except there was one, technically, the east wing. When the phone system was originally set up in the 70s, the east wing was designated as wing 0 because it was the original building and everything else was added after. When they closed the east wing, they deactivated the extensions. Or they were supposed to have deactivated them. That was handled by the IT department, and I hadn't been involved. I sat there for a moment looking at the number on the display, 4012, East Wing, 2nd floor, phone 12. I picked up the handset. The line was dead by then. I put it back down. I want to be clear about what I was thinking, because it wasn't fear. It was annoyance, honestly. If the East Wing extensions were still active in the phone system, that was an IT issue that should have been resolved 2 years ago. And dead extensions on an active phone network can cause phantom calls, cross-line interference, all kinds of noise. I made a mental note to put in a ticket about it in the morning, and I went back to monitoring the boiler readouts. The phone didn't ring again that night. I did put in the ticket. I sent it to IT with a note explaining that I'd received 2 calls from an East Wing extension that should have been deactivated. I asked them to check the phone system routing and confirm that all East Wing lines were properly taken offline. The ticket sat in the queue for 4 days before someone responded. The response was brief. East Wing extensions were deactivated during decommission. We'll verify. I never got a follow-up. The next Tuesday night, it happened again. This time it was around 2:15 in the morning. I was coming back from checking on a circulation pump in the sub-basement, and when I got back to the mechanical room, the message light on my desk phone was blinking. I checked the voicemail. There was one new message. I played it. It was 43 seconds of nothing. Not silence. That open line hum. 43 seconds of a live connection with no one speaking. The system had picked it up on the 4th ring, as it was set to do when I was away from the desk, and whoever or whatever was on the other end had stayed connected for 43 seconds before the line dropped. I checked the caller ID log, extension 4012 again. I sat down and pulled up the building management system. The BMS tracks everything. Power loads, HVAC zones, water pressure, fire panel status, access control. I navigated to the East Wing section and to everything read as expected for a decommissioned space. Emergency lighting circuit active but drawing minimal power. HVAC offline. Water supply valved off at the main. Fire panel in bypass mode, which meant the sensors were still technically connected, but alarms were routed to a secondary monitoring screen that nobody watched because nobody needed to. There was nothing in the BMS that suggested any activity in the East Wing. No power draw beyond the emergency lighting, no door alarms, no movement, nothing. I listened to the voicemail again. 43 seconds. I listened for anything in the background, a hum, a click, breathing. There was nothing identifiable, just the hiss of an open line. I deleted the message and sent another email to IT. This time I was more specific. I told them the extension was still making outgoing calls and that it needed to be physically disconnected at the patch panel, not just deactivated in software. I marked it as priority. I didn't hear back for a week. When I did, the response was from a different IT tech than the first one. He said he'd checked the patch panel and that the East Wing extensions were not connected. The physical cables had been pulled during the decommission. He said there was no way extension 4012 could make an outgoing call because it wasn't physically wired to the phone network anymore. I read that email 3 times. Then I checked my phone's caller ID log again. The calls were there. 2 entries for extension 4012, time-stamped correctly. The phone system had registered them. The display had shown the number. The voicemail had recorded the connection. I forwarded the log to the IT tech and asked him to explain. He didn't respond. I want to pause here and say something about how institutional systems work, because I think it's important. When you work in a hospital or any large building with complex infrastructure, you learn very quickly that things break in weird ways. Phone systems ghost, alarms false, sensors misread, software glitches create phantom data. I have seen the BMS report a temperature of -40 degrees in a room that was perfectly comfortable because a sensor wire had corroded and was sending garbage data. I have seen fire alarms trigger because a spider built a web inside a smoke detector. I have seen an elevator call button on the 3rd floor activate the elevator on the 1st floor because of a wiring error that had existed since installation and no one had ever noticed. The point is, I had a lifetime of experience with building systems doing impossible things for perfectly mundane reasons. And my default assumption, my trained assumption, was that this was one of those things. A phone system glitch, a software artifact, an extension number being recycled or misrouted somewhere in the labyrinth of the PBX. There had to be a technical explanation. There always was, so I let it go for a while. The calls didn't stop. Over the next 3 weeks, I received calls from extension 4012 on 4 more of my overnight shifts, always between midnight and 3 in the morning. Always the same. The phone would ring, and I'd pick up or the voicemail would catch it, and there would be nothing on the other end except that open line hum. The duration varied. Sometimes it was 15 seconds. Once it was almost 2 minutes. I started keeping a log, date, time, duration, any notes. I'm a facilities guy. Documentation is how I think. I kept the log in a small notebook I carried in my breast pocket. I also started noting whether anything else unusual was happening in the building at the same time. Temperature spikes, power fluctuations, alarm events. I was looking for correlations. I didn't find any. The calls came on quiet nights and busy nights, rainy nights and clear nights. There was no pattern I could identify except the time window in the extension. It was around the 4th week that I mentioned it to Ray, who worked the security desk on my overnight shifts. Ray was in his late 50s, a retired county sheriff's deputy who'd taken the hospital security job because it was low stress and the benefits were good. He was calm, methodical, not given to drama. I liked Ray. He was the kind of person who'd sit with you at 3 a.m. and talk about nothing in a way that made the hours pass. I told him about the calls. I kept it factual. Extension 4012, East Wing, supposedly disconnected but still showing up on my phone. I told him IT had said the physical cables were pulled. I told him I didn't have an explanation. Ray listened, nodded, and said something I didn't expect. He said he'd been getting them too. Not on his desk phone. On the security desk phone, which was a different system, a direct line that was supposed to be isolated from the internal PBX. He said he'd picked up twice in the past 2 weeks and gotten dead air. He'd assumed it was an external wrong number because the security line had an outside number as well. But he said the caller ID had shown an internal extension both times. He hadn't written it down. He couldn't remember if it was 4012 specifically, but it was a 4000 number, he was sure of that, and 4000 numbers were East Wing. We sat with that for a minute. It was about 1:30 in the morning and the security desk was quiet. The monitors showed empty hallways and green-tinted night vision. The rain was tapping against the lobby windows. Ray took a sip of his coffee and said maybe it was a wiring thing. Old buildings. Wires touching in a wall somewhere. Creating a circuit that shouldn't exist. I said, yeah, maybe. He said we should probably tell somebody. I said I'd been telling IT for a month and nobody seemed to care. Ray said something then that stuck with me. He said the thing about institutions is they don't like problems they can't categorize. A broken pipe, they understand. A phone call from a disconnected extension, they don't have a form for that, so it just doesn't get addressed. It falls into the gap between departments. IT says it's not a phone issue. Facility says it's not a building issue. Administration doesn't know it's happening because nobody escalates it because nobody knows whose job it is. He was right. And that's exactly what was happening. The calls from the East Wing were falling into a procedural gap. And every time I tried to push them up through the system, they hit a wall of indifference. Not malice. Just the ordinary bureaucratic incapacity of a mid-sized institution to deal with something that doesn't fit. It was around week 6 that the calls changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make a good movie scene, but enough that I noticed, and enough that I stopped being annoyed and started being something else. It was a Thursday, early December. Cold outside, the kind of cold that makes the building contract and you hear pops and groans from the structure all night. I was at my desk, and the phone rang at 1:47 a.m. Extension 4012. I picked up. The open line hum was there, as always. But this time, underneath it, I heard something. It was faint. It was distant. And I know how this sounds. But it was breathing. Not heavy breathing. Not the theatrical gasp of a prank caller. It was slow. Measured, barely there. The kind of breathing you might hear from someone sleeping, or someone very still, just the faintest variation in the hum, a slight thickening and thinning of the sound, rhythmic, organic, in and out, in and out. I held the phone to my ear and didn't speak. I listened for maybe 30 seconds. The breathing continued, unchanged. Unaware of me or indifferent to me. Then the line went dead. I put the phone down and sat there. My coffee was cold. The BMS screen glowed in front of me with its grid of normal readings. The boiler hummed. Everything was as it should be, except that I had just listened to someone breathing on a phone line connected to a building that had been empty for over 2 years. I checked the BMS again. East wing. Emergency lighting on, everything else off. No power draw, no HVAC, or no water. No movement detected on any sensor. I picked up the phone and dialed extension 4012. I don't know why I did this. I think I wanted to prove to myself that it was a glitch, that dialing the number would result in a deadline or an error tone because the extension didn't exist anymore, and that would confirm that whatever was calling me was just a system artifact. The phone rang. On the other end, it rang. 3 times, 4 times, 5. The kind of ring you hear when a real phone in a real room is ringing and no one is picking up. It rang 9 times. Then it stopped, and there was nothing. Not a voicemail pickup. Not an error. Just the line going dead. I put the phone down. My hand was steady, but there was something in my chest that hadn't been there before. Not quite fear. More like the feeling you get when you realize a piece of furniture in your house has moved and you live alone. The feeling of a fact that doesn't fit. I didn't call the extension again. I didn't tell anyone about the breathing. Not yet. I wrote it in my notebook. 1:47 a.m. 4012. Breathing online. Called back. Rang 9 times. No answer. For the next week, I went back and forth with myself about what to do. The practical part of me, the part that had kept buildings running for over a decade, said this was a phone system issue, and it needed to be escalated beyond the local IT team to the phone system vendor. The other part of me, the part I didn't have a name for yet, said that wouldn't explain the breathing. I decided to go look at the east wing. Not go inside. Just go look at the connector hall. Check the fire doors. I'd make sure they were still sealed. If someone had gotten into the east wing, a homeless person, a trespasser, someone looking for a place to sleep, that would explain everything. It would be a security issue, and it would be resolved by security, and I could stop thinking about it. I went on a Tuesday night around midnight. I told Ray I was going to check the connector hall doors, and he nodded and said he'd log it. The connector hall was on the first floor, accessed from the main hospital corridor, near the old outpatient registration area, which had been moved to the new building 2 years ago. That part of the first floor was quiet at night. The lights were dimmed. The old registration desks sat empty behind glass partitions. The computers dark, the chairs pushed in. It had the feeling of a place that was still waiting for people who were never coming back. The entrance to the connector hall was a set of double fire doors with a magnetic lock and a sign that read, East Wing, closed, authorized, personnel only. The sign was laminated and mounted at eye level. Below it, someone had taped a smaller paper sign that said, No patient access, in handwritten block letters. The tape was yellowed. I badged the magnetic lock. It beeped red. Access denied. I tried again. Red again. My badge didn't have clearance for the East Wing. Of course it didn't. Why would it? The wing was closed. I hadn't requested access because I'd never needed it. I stood there in the dim hallway, looking at the fire doors. They were solid, no windows. The magnetic lock indicator showed green from the other side, which meant it was locked and holding. The door frame showed no signs of tampering. The floor in front of the doors was clean, no scuff marks, no debris, no indication that anyone had been through them recently. I pressed my ear to the door. I don't know what I expected to hear. What I heard was nothing. Not even the hum of the emergency lighting, though it was probably too faint to transmit through a fire-rated door. Just the muffled silence of a closed space. I stepped back and stood there for a moment, alone in that dim hallway, looking at those doors. The connector hall stretched away behind them, I knew, 150 feet of empty corridor leading to a dark and empty building. 2 floors, 40 rooms, nurse stations and supply closets, and a small chapel on the first floor that I'd forgotten about until just then. All of it sitting there in the dark, on the other end of the emergency lighting circuit, waiting. I left. I went back to the mechanical room and finished my shift without incident. The next morning I sent an email to the facilities director, my boss, a man named Terrence Walsh. I explained the situation concisely. Repeated calls from a deactivated East Wing extension, IT unable to explain or resolve. Need for physical access to the East Wing to inspect and potentially identify the source. I requested temporary badge access to the connector hall doors. Terrence responded the next day. His email was 2 sentences. I'll look into the access request. Please continue to document the calls. 2 weeks went by. I didn't get badge access. I did continue to document the calls. They were coming almost every shift now, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and reliably between midnight and 3. The breathing was present on most of them. Always the same. Faint, slow, rhythmic. Sometimes the line would stay open for over a minute. Sometimes it dropped after 20 seconds. I stopped picking up the phone and started letting the voicemail catch everything, so I'd have a recording. I saved each message. I played one for Ray one night. I held the phone out on speaker and let the voicemail play. 40 seconds of open line hum with that thin, distant breathing underneath. Ray listened with his arms crossed, his face neutral. When it ended, he looked at me and said, "That's not a phone glitch." I said, "I know." He said, "Have you gone over there?" I said, "I tried. I don't have badge access. I'm waiting on Terrence." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have keys to the fire stairs, and she's the external ones. On the back lot." I looked at him. He explained that security had a master set for all external doors, including the East Wing fire exits, because of emergency egress requirements. Even though the internal fire doors in the connector hall were badge controlled, the external fire stairs had physical locks and security had the keys. They were supposed to. The fire code required it. I asked him if we were allowed to go in there. He said technically, with a documented safety concern, security had the authority to do a wellness check of any part of the building. He said he'd log it as a perimeter inspection. We agreed to do it the following Thursday. I spent the intervening days thinking about what we'd find. The rational scenarios. A squatter who'd found a way in. An animal. Rats in the wiring. A phone handset knocked off its cradle by vibrations from the building's mechanical systems, somehow maintaining a connection to the network, even though IT said it couldn't. Each of these explanations had problems, but each was possible. I held on to them. Thursday came. It was mid-December now, and the nights were long and very cold. I met Ray at the security desk at midnight. He had a heavy flashlight, his radio, and a ring of keys. I had my own flashlight, smaller, and my notebook. We walked through the hospital to the back corridor. past the loading dock, and out through a service exit into the parking lot. The east wing rose up on our left. From the outside, it looked like what it was. A 2-story brick building from the early 70s, flat-roofed, institutional. The windows were dark. Some of them had the blinds drawn and some didn't. It looked abandoned but not ruined. No broken glass, no graffiti, just dark and still. The emergency lighting inside cast a faint glow behind some of the windows. The barest suggestion of light, like the building was keeping its eyes half open while it slept. The fire stairs were at the far end of the east wing, enclosed in a concrete stairwell that jutted out from the building's exterior. The door was metal, painted gray, with a push bar on the inside and a keyed lock on the outside. A chain had been looped through the push bar and padlocked, visible through a small wired glass window in the door. Ray found the right key after 3 tries and unlocked the exterior lock. Then he shone his flashlight through the glass, located the padlock on the chain, and said we'd need bolt cutters. He radioed the security office and asked the other guard on duty, a younger guy named Marcus, to bring bolt cutters to the east lot. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, didn't ask questions, cut the chain, and left. Ray and I stood at the open door. The stairwell was concrete, as I said. Our flashlights showed bare walls, metal handrails, steps going up. The emergency lighting was on. Dim, yellow-green. The kind of light that's technically illumination, but practically just makes the shadows more defined. The air that came out of the stairwell was cold. Not outside cold, a different cold. The cold of an enclosed space that hasn't been heated in years. Stale, still, with a faint mineral smell, like concrete dust and old water. Ray went first. I followed. Our footsteps echoed in the stairwell, sharp and loud, as we went up one flight to the first-floor landing. There was a door here with a push bar and a small window. Ray pushed it open. The first floor of the east wing opened up in front of us. The emergency lighting ran in a strip along the ceiling, every third fixture active, casting that same dim yellow-green glow. The hallway stretched to the left and right, long and straight, with patient rooms on both sides. The doors were all open. I could see into the nearest rooms. Empty beds, stripped to the mattresses. Some had bedside tables, some didn't. The window blinds were in various positions. The floor was that old checkerboard tile, and our flashlight beams swept across it and showed a thin layer of dust. Not thick, not years of abandonment. Just a gentle, even film, like the building was slowly exhaling particles of itself. It was quiet. You're profoundly quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture. The hospital proper, even at night, always has a background hum. The HVAC, the elevators, the distant sounds of occupied spaces. In the East Wing, there was none of that. The HVAC was off. The elevators were locked out. There were no occupied spaces. What was left was the faint buzz of the emergency lighting, and beneath that, nothing. An absence so complete it felt physical, like the air itself was holding still. Ray and I stood in the hallway and listened. I remember the feeling very precisely. It was not fear, not yet. It was a heightened awareness, the way your senses sharpen when you step into an unfamiliar environment. Every detail was vivid. The crack in the ceiling tile above us. The way the dust on the floor showed no footprints except ours, and the small red light on a fire pole stationed down the hall, blinking its slow, patient blink. I said quietly that we should find the phone. Extension 4012 would be on the second floor, based on the numbering convention. But I wanted to check the first floor first. The nurse station, the rooms, see if there was any sign of habitation. We walked the first floor hallway. It took about 10 minutes. Every room was the same: empty bed, stripped mattress, closed blinds or open blinds. Silence. The nurse station was intact. A curved desk with built-in shelving and a computer monitor that was dark and dusty. There were still papers in some of the cubbies. Old patient charts, medication logs, scheduling sheets. Left behind when the wing closed. No one had cleaned it out. They'd just locked the doors and walked away. When the chapel was at the end of the first floor hallway, a small room with 6 rows of wooden chairs and a simple wooden cross on the wall. A Bible sat on a stand near the front. The emergency lighting in here was dimmer than in the hallway, just one fixture, and the room was mostly in shadow. It looked untouched, peaceful even, like it was still waiting for someone to come and sit down. We found nothing on the first floor. No squatter, no animal, no sign that anyone had been in the east wing since it closed. The dust was undisturbed. The doors were as they'd been left. Everything was in order, if you can call an abandoned hospital wing orderly. We went up to the second floor. The second floor was identical in layout to the first. Same hallway, same rooms, same nurse station. The emergency lighting was the same dim yellow-green. The air was the same stale cold. Our flashlights moved across the same checkerboard tile, the same dust. But there was something different about the second floor, and I need to be careful about how I describe this because I don't want to overstate it. It wasn't a sound, it wasn't a sight. It was more like a quality of the air, a density, the feeling you get when you walk into a room where someone has recently been, even if they're not there anymore. A warmth that isn't thermal, a presence that isn't physical. I know how that sounds. I know it's not evidence of anything. But Ray felt it too because he slowed down and I saw him scanning the hallway more carefully, his flashlight moving in slower arcs. We walked to the nurse station on the second floor. Like the one downstairs, it was a curved desk with shelving and a dark computer monitor. But this one had something the first floor didn't. A phone. A beige desktop phone. The old kind with the curly handset cord. It sat on the desk, the handset in its cradle. I pointed my flashlight at it and looked for a label. Every phone in the hospital had a small label on the base, showing its extension number. I leaned over the desk and tilted the phone. The label was there printed on a strip of white tape, slightly yellowed. 4012. I looked at Ray. He looked at the phone. He said, "Is it plugged in?" I followed the cord from the base of the phone down to the wall jack. It was plugged in. The phone cord ran into a standard RJ11 wall jack, the kind you'd find in any hospital room. I crouched down and looked at the jack. It was firmly seated. The wall plate was intact, but IT had said the physical cables were pulled. The patch panel connections were disconnected. Even if this phone was plugged into the wall jack, there should have been nothing on the other end. No dial tone, no connection, no way to make or receive a call. I picked up the handset. There was a dial tone. I held it out so Ray could hear. The steady, clear hum of a live phone line. Ray's face didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. He reached for his radio, then stopped. I think he was going to call Marcus or the main desk or someone. But what would he say? There's a dial tone in the East Wing? I put the handset back in the cradle. I stood there looking at the phone. This beige phone on this dusty desk, in this dark, cold, empty building that had been closed for 2.5 years. And it was live. It was connected. It was, according to the evidence, calling my desk phone at 1 a.m. and breathing into the line. I'm a practical man. I work with systems. I troubleshoot problems. And in that moment, standing in the East Wing at 12:40 in the morning, I could not troubleshoot this. The phone should not have had a dial tone. The extension should not have been active. Even if, by some miracle of misrouted wiring, the phone was somehow connected to the hospital's PBX, there was no one here to pick up the handset and dial my extension. There was no one here to breathe. Ray said we should go. He said it quietly, practically. He said we documented the phone, we knew where it was, and we could report it in the morning and have IT come up during the day and physically remove it. I agreed. We turned to leave. That's when the phone rang. I've replayed this in my mind many times. The sound of a phone ringing in a dark, empty room is not the same as the sound of a phone ringing in an office. In an office, it's a summons, an interruption. In that empty nurse station on the second floor of the East Wing at 12:40 in the morning, it was an event. It was loud and shrill in the silence, and it seemed to come from everywhere because the hallway was hard surfaces, and the sound bounced and multiplied. We both stopped. The phone rang a second time, a third time. I looked at Ray. He was looking at the phone. His flashlight was pointed at it, and the beam was steady. He said, "Don't answer it." A fourth ring, a fifth. I didn't answer it. I stood there and counted. It rang 11 times, then stopped. The silence that followed was enormous. Ray and I left the East Wing. We went down the fire stairs, out into the cold parking lot, and back into the main hospital through the service entrance. Neither of us said anything until we were back at the security desk. Then Ray logged our inspection in the security system. East Wing perimeter check. Fire stairs accessed. No signs of intrusion. Phone equipment remains connected at second floor nurse station. Recommend IT removal. That was it. That was what the log said. It didn't mention the dial tone. It didn't mention the phone ringing. It didn't mention the feeling on the second floor. It said what could be said in the language of institutional documentation, and it left the rest out. I went back to the mechanical room and sat at my desk for the remainder of my shift. The phone did not ring. The BMS showed normal readings across the board. The boilers cycled, or the building hummed. Everything was as it should be. In the morning, I sent an email to Terrence with a summary of the inspection. I told him the phone at extension 4012 was still physically present and appeared to have an active connection. I recommended immediate removal. I attached Ray's security log entry. Terrence responded within an hour, which was unusual. He said he'd send IT to the East Wing that day to remove the phone. He said I didn't need to go back. I want to describe what the next 2 weeks were like, because I think it's important to understand the texture of this experience. After that night in the East Wing, I went back to my normal routine. I did my shifts. I monitored the BMS. I fixed a leaking valve in the third floor bathroom. I replaced a ballast in a flickering light fixture in the ER waiting room. I did my job, but something had shifted. I found myself listening differently. On my overnight shifts, I'd catch myself pausing in hallways, holding still, paying attention to the ambient sounds of the building in a way I hadn't before. Not because I was afraid, because I was recalibrating. The building sounded the same as it always had. But my relationship to that sound had changed. I was listening for the thing underneath it. The thing that shouldn't be there. The calls stopped. For 12 days after our visit to the East Wing, my desk phone did not ring from extension 4012. I assumed IT had gone in and removed the phone as directed. Problem solved. System corrected. I didn't ask for confirmation because I didn't want to think about it anymore. I wanted the log entries in my notebook to be the end of the story. On the 13th day, being a Thursday night in early January, the phone rang at 2:08 a.m., extension 4012. I stared at the display for 3 full rings before I picked up. The breathing was there. But it was different now. It was closer. Not louder exactly, closer. As if the distance between the source of the breathing and the phone had decreased. As if someone who'd been across the room from the handset was now standing right next to it. Right over it. And beneath the breathing, for the first time, there was something else. A sound I couldn't immediately identify. A faint rhythmic tapping. Not mechanical, not electrical. Irregular, but consistent. Like a finger on a hard surface. Like someone drumming their fingers on a desk. Slowly, absently, the way you might do when you're waiting for something. I listened for a full minute. The breathing continued, and the tapping continued. Then the line went dead. I put the phone down and called IT. Not by email. I called the IT on-call number, which technically was for system-critical issues only, but I didn't care. A tech named David answered, sounding tired. I told him I needed confirmation that the phone at extension 4012 in the East Wing had been removed. David put me on hold. He came back 3 minutes later and said he'd checked the work order log. The ticket to remove the East Wing phone had been assigned, but not completed. The tech who'd been assigned had gone to the connector hall, found that his badge didn't have access, submitted an access request, and was waiting for approval. The phone had not been removed. I asked him how long the access request had been pending. He said 8 days. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in the mechanical room and thought about the bureaucratic process that was keeping a phone ringing in an empty building. An access request pending for 8 days. A badge clearance sitting in someone's queue, a form waiting for a signature. And every night between midnight and 3 in the morning, that phone coming alive in the dark and reaching out to me. The next morning I went to Terrence's office in person. I'd never done this before about this issue. I'd kept it to emails and tickets, the proper channels, but the proper channels were failing and the phone was still calling, and I needed someone to understand that this wasn't a routine maintenance issue. Terrence was at his desk, eating a sandwich. He was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s with glasses and a patient demeanor that I'd always appreciated until that morning. I sat down across from him and told him everything, the calls, the extension, IT's inability to explain the connection, the visit to the East Wing, the dial tone, the phone ringing while we were there, the breathing, the tapping, the access request that had been sitting for 8 days. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and cleaned them with his tie, which was a thing he did when he was thinking. Then he said, "Joel, the East Wing is not our responsibility. It's been turned over to the county for disposition. Any physical changes to the space, including removal of equipment, require county approval." I said I understood that. But the phone was part of the hospital's active phone system and was creating a disruption. He said, I'll escalate the access request. I said that wasn't enough. I said someone needed to go in there and disconnect that phone today. He said, I hear you. I'll make some calls. I left his office, knowing that nothing was going to happen quickly. The institutional gears would turn at their institutional speed, and in the meantime, the phone would ring. It did. That night, and the night after, and the night after that. The character of the calls was changing, and I need to be precise about this. The breathing was now always present, always close. The tapping came and went. But there was a new element that appeared for the first time on a Tuesday night in mid-January, and this is the part of the story that I have the most difficulty with, even now. The phone rang at 1:33 a.m. I picked up. The breathing was there, the tapping was there, and then, underneath both, so faint that I had to press the handset hard against my ear and close my eyes to focus, there was a voice. Not words, not a message, not someone trying to communicate. It was a voice in the way that the wind through a cracked window is a voice. A sustained, barely audible tone that rose and fell with the breathing. A moan that was not pain and not speech. A sound that a person might make if they were very far away and didn't know they were making any sound at all. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then faded back into the breathing. The breathing continued for another minute. Then the line went dead. I sat at my desk with the handset still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead line. My heart was beating hard, and I realized that for the first time in this entire experience, I was afraid. Not unsettled, not curious, afraid. Because a phone system glitch can produce a dial tone, it can produce noise, it can produce phantom rings. What it cannot produce is a human voice. I went to find Ray. He was doing his rounds, and I caught him on the second floor of the main building near the elevator bank. I told him about the voice. He listened, then said, "We need to go back." I said I knew, but I said I didn't want to go at night. I wanted to go during the day, with other people, with proper authorization. Ray said, "Joel, if someone is in that building, they need help." That hit me differently than I expected, because in all my thinking about the calls, in all my documentation and troubleshooting and emails, I had been framing it as a problem to solve, a system malfunction, an anomaly. What I hadn't fully considered, or had been avoiding considering, was the simplest and most disturbing possibility that a person was in the East Wing, a real person, trapped or hiding or hurt. And they were calling for help. We went back that night. Same route, out the service entrance, across the parking lot, and through the fire stairs. Ray had gotten Marcus to cut a new chain for the door and had the key to the new padlock. We went in at 1:50 a.m. The East Wing was the same, the emergency lighting, the cold air, the dust, the silence. We went straight to the second floor. The nurse station was as we'd left it. The phone was gone. The desk was there. The shelving was there. The dust was there. But the phone was gone. The wall jack was empty. The cord pulled out and coiled neatly on the desk where the phone had been, as if someone had unplugged it, picked it up, and taken it away. Recently. The dust on the desk was disturbed in a rectangle where the phone had sat. I looked at Ray. He was staring at the empty desk. I said, "Did it come in?" He said, "I would have been notified. They'd need security to access the fire stairs." I said, "Then who took the phone?" We searched the second floor. Every room, every closet, the supply room, the medication room, each in the staff bathroom at the end of the hall, all empty, all undisturbed. No phone, no person, no sign that anyone had been there. We searched the first floor. Same result. The chapel was as we'd left it, the Bible open on its stand. The rooms were empty. The dust was settled. The phone was simply gone. We left the East Wing for the second time. Ray logged it. Second East Wing inspection. Phone equipment previously noted at second floor nurse station has been removed. No personnel present. No signs of unauthorized access. The institutional language again? The sanitized summary that left out everything important. I didn't sleep well that night. I went home after my shift and lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the rectangle in the dust where the phone had been. Someone had taken it. Someone had been in the East Wing. But there were no footprints in the dust on the floors. I'd looked. Ray had looked. The dust was undisturbed everywhere except that one rectangle on the nurse station desk. A phone doesn't move itself. A phone doesn't unplug itself and coil its own cord neatly. Someone had done that. But there was no evidence of anyone having walked through the hallways to do it. I turned this over in my mind for days. I couldn't make it work. Every explanation I tried collapsed under the weight of the dust, the undisturbed dust. If a person had walked into the East Wing through any entrance, there would be footprints in the dust. Period. There were none. Just mine and Ray's from our 2 visits. 3 days after our second visit, I was at my desk on an overnight shift when the phone rang. I didn't look at the display before I picked up. I just answered the way I always did. Extension 4012. I felt something drop in my stomach. Not surprise exactly, something heavier than surprise. Something that was almost recognition, like some part of me had known this was going to happen. The phone was gone. The cord was unplugged. The physical device was no longer on the desk, and extension 4012 was calling me. The breathing was there. The tapping was there. And the voice was there. Stronger now. Still wordless. Still that low, sustained tone that rose and fell, but louder, nearer, as if whatever was making the sound had moved closer, not just to the phone, but to me, as if the distance between us was shrinking by some measure that had nothing to do with physical space. I listened for 90 seconds, then I hung up. I didn't call Ray. I didn't call a T. I didn't email Terrence. When I sat at my desk in the mechanical room, surrounded by the hum of boilers and the glow of the BMS terminal, and I tried to understand what I was dealing with. A phone that no longer existed was calling my extension. The physical device had been removed. The wall jack was empty. The patch panel was disconnected. The cables were pulled. And it was calling me. Not just a number on a display, a breathing, tapping, moaning connection that was reaching me through a phone system that should not have been able to carry it. I opened the BMS and navigated to the East Wing section. I'd done this dozens of times over the past 2 months, and the readings were always the same. Emergency lighting on, everything else off. This time something was different. The HVAC zone for the East Wing second floor was showing a temperature reading. Not an error. Not a garbage number from a corroded sensor. A temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit. The East Wing HVAC was off. The system was shut down. There was no heating or cooling being provided to that space. In January, in an unheated building, the ambient temperature should have been in the 40s or low 50s. roughly tracking the outside temperature with some insulation buffer. It had been 38 degrees outside that night. The first floor of the east wing, when I checked its sensor, showed 41 degrees. Consistent, expected. The second floor showed 62 degrees. 20 degrees warmer than it should have been, 20 degrees warmer than the floor directly below it, with no heating system active. I printed the screen. I checked the sensor data history, which the BMS logged every 15 minutes. The second floor temperature had been climbing gradually for the past 6 hours. At 8 p.m., it had been 43 degrees. By midnight, it was 55. By 2 a.m., when I was looking at it, it was 62 and still rising. Something on the second floor of the east wing was generating heat. I sat there with the printout in my hands and felt the kind of fear that doesn't make you run, the kind that makes you very still. Because running implies there's somewhere to go, and what I was realizing slowly, sitting in the mechanical room of St. Marian's Hospital at 2 a.m. was that the thing I was dealing with was not in a place I could run from. It was in the building systems. It was in the phone lines and the temperature sensors in the air. It was part of the infrastructure now, or it always had been, and I had only just started seeing it because it had only just started reaching out. I checked the second floor temperature every 15 minutes for the rest of my shift. At 3 a.m., it was 68 degrees. At 4 a.m., 71. At 5 a.m., it plateaued at 72 degrees and held 72 degrees. Room temperature, the temperature of an occupied space, the temperature of a room where someone is living. At 6 a.m., when my shift ended and the day crew began arriving, I checked one last time. The second floor temperature was 44 degrees, consistent with the outside temperature, as if nothing had happened, as if the heat had never been there. I took the printout home with me. I still have it. The timestamp, the temperature readings, the steady climb from 43 to 72, and then the drop back down. It's in my notebook, EQ folded between the pages where I logged the calls. Hard evidence, data. The BMS doesn't lie, and it doesn't hallucinate. Something was warming the second floor of the east wing at night, and then before morning it stopped. I called in sick for my next shift. I needed a night away from the building. I sat in my apartment and read through my notebook, all the entries, from the first call in November to the temperature anomaly in January. 2.5 months of data. I tried to see it as a facilities problem, which is what I was trained to do. Identify the system, identify the failure, trace it to a root cause, fix it. But there was no system that could explain all of it. The phone calls, the breathing, the voice, the phone disappearing, the phone still calling after it disappeared, the temperature rise. No single root cause could account for all of those things. Not a wiring error, not a software glitch, not a squatter, not an animal. Each explanation covered 1 or 2 data points and left the rest hanging. Unless I accepted a possibility that I'd spent my entire professional life dismissing. Unless I accepted that something was in the east wing that shouldn't be there, and that it was not a person, and it was not a malfunction, and it was something that the building systems could carry, but not explain. I didn't accept it. Not then. Not in so many words. What I did instead was what I'd always done. I went back to work. I continued my shifts. I continued to receive the calls, and I continued to log them, and I continued to check the BMS. and the second floor temperature continued its nightly climb and dawn collapse. Again, and I continued to not tell anyone about it because who would I tell and what would I say? Terrence never got me badge access to the connector hall. The IT tech never removed the phone because the phone had removed itself. Ray and I didn't go back to the East Wing. We talked about it occasionally at the security desk at 2 a.m. in the shared language of two people who are witnessing the same impossible thing and have agreed, without saying so, to witness it together. It was Ray who told me about the records. He said he'd been curious about the East Wing's history. Not the building history, which we both knew. The patient history. He had access to the hospital's old administrative database through the security system, which was linked to the patient record system for identification purposes. And he said he'd searched for incidents in the East Wing. He'd found one that he thought I should know about. In 2014, 8 years before the wing closed, a patient named Margaret Hollis had been admitted to the East Wing during a flu season overflow. She was 78 years old, admitted for pneumonia. She was placed in room 212 on the second floor. Room 212 was directly adjacent to the nurse station. The nurse station where phone extension 4012 had been. Margaret Hollis had died in room 212 on a Tuesday night in January 2014. She had not died of pneumonia. She had died because the call light system in the East Wing had malfunctioned that night. Her room's call light, when she pressed it, did not register at the nurse station. The nurse on duty, covering the wing alone due to staffing shortages, Ari did not check on her for nearly 4 hours. By the time someone found her, she had suffered a cardiac event and died alone in her room. The incident had been investigated. The call light malfunction was attributed to aging wiring in the East Wing's electrical system. There was a settlement with the family. Procedural changes were made. The event was documented and filed. Ray showed me the report. He'd printed it out. There was a detail in it that I haven't stopped thinking about. During the investigation, a nurse who'd been working a different floor that night stated that she had received a phone call from the East Wing nurse station at approximately 2:15 a.m., the estimated time of Margaret Hollis's cardiac event. She said the line was open, but no one spoke. She assumed it was a misdial and hung up. The nurse station phone, extension 4012. I read that detail 3 times, sitting at the security desk with Ray in the quiet of a January night. A woman had died alone in the East Wing because the system meant to protect her had failed. The call light that should have summoned help had been silent. And the phone at the nurse station, the phone that was now calling me, had reached out that night too, to a different floor. An open line. No voice. As if something in the building had tried to call for help on her behalf and no one had understood. I am going to tell you what happened next, and then I'm going to be done, because I don't like to spend too long in this part of the story. It was the last Tuesday in January. I was at my desk in the mechanical room. It was 2:14 a.m., 1 minute before the time Margaret Hollis had died, 10 years ago, almost to the day. The phone rang. Extension 4012. I picked up. The breathing was there, the tapping was there, the voice was there, but this time the voice resolved. Not into words, not exactly, into a single sound. A syllable, repeated. A weak, breathy push of air that carried just enough shape to be recognized as language. Help. It was said the way a very old, very tired person would say it. Not a scream, not a cry, a statement, an exhaustion. The last effort of someone who's been pressing a button that doesn't work, calling a phone that no one answers, trying to be heard by a system that has already failed them. Help. And then the line went dead. I put the phone down. I put my head in my hands. I sat there for a long time. The next morning, I submitted a formal request to the facilities director, to hospital administration, and to the county, asking that the phone infrastructure in the East Wing be completely and physically disconnected. Not deactivated, not decommissioned. Cut. Every cable, every jack, every junction box. I cited the ongoing phone system disruptions and the fire code implications of active wiring in a closed building. I framed it in language that the system could understand. I did not mention breathing. I did not mention a voice. I did not mention Margaret Hollis. The request was approved in February. A contractor came in March and spent 2 days in the East Wing cutting and removing every telecommunications cable in the building. I was not present for the work. I did not go into the East Wing. I asked the contractor's foreman when he was done if he'd found anything unusual. He said no. He said it was just an old building with old wiring. The calls stopped. Extension 4012 no longer appeared on my phone. The BMS temperature readings for the East Wing second floor returned to normal and stayed there. Whatever had been reaching out through the phone system was cut off when the cables were cut. That's how I understood it then. That's how I choose to understand it now. I kept working at St. Marian's for another year after that. I did my overnight shifts. I sat in the mechanical room and drank bad coffee and watched the boilers cycle. I did my job. But I was different. I knew I was different because of how I moved through the building at night. I used to walk the halls without thinking. Now I listened. Every sound had a question mark attached to it. Every hum could be hiding something underneath. Shit. And when I passed the corridor near the old outpatient registration area, the corridor that led to the connector hall doors, I walked faster. I didn't look at the doors. I didn't stop. I walked faster, the way you walk past a place where something happened that you don't want to remember. I transferred to the day shift 6 months later. I told Terrence it was for personal reasons, which was true. I no longer wanted to be alone in the building at night. Not because I was afraid of the East Wing specifically, the cables were cut, the calls had stopped, but because the building had shown me something about itself that I couldn't unshow. A hospital is a system. It has procedures, protocols, hierarchies, documentation, and all of that structure exists to create the feeling of safety, of control, of human mastery over a physical space. And what the East Wing taught me is that the structure is thinner than you think, that there are things it cannot contain, and when it fails quietly, and the people inside it don't always know until it's too late. Margaret Hollis pressed her call button and no one came. She was in a hospital. She was surrounded by people whose job it was to help her, and the system failed, and she died alone in the dark. And the only thing that tried to reach out on her behalf was a phone line that no one recognized as a cry for help. I think about that. I think about it more than I should. I still work at St. Marian's. Day shift now. The East Wing is still there. Still closed. Still connected to the building. I see it from the parking lot every morning when I come in. The windows are dark. The blinds are drawn. The brick is starting to show its age. Moss creeping up the north face, the mortar cracking. They'll demolish it eventually, or they'll sell the land, or they'll renovate it. Something will happen to it. Institutional plans will be made. In the meantime, it sits there. 2 stories of empty rooms and stripped mattresses and checkerboard tile and dust. And a nurse station on the 2nd floor with an empty desk and a wall jack with no cord and a rectangle in the dust where a phone used to be. The cables are cut. I know the cables are cut because I saw the work order and I saw the contractor's invoice and I have the documentation in a file in my desk. But last week, I was in the main building after hours finishing up some paperwork and I passed a phone in the hallway near the radiology suite. It's a wall-mounted phone. We're the kind they have at intervals along the main corridors for staff use. I was walking past it, not thinking about anything, and it rang. I stopped. I looked at it. It rang again. I didn't pick it up. I stood there in the hallway in the dim after-hours lighting, and I let it ring. It rang 7 times. Then it stopped. I looked at the display. It showed no caller ID, just a blank line where the extension number should be. I stood there for a while. Then I walked away. I walked to my car and I drove home, and I sat in my kitchen and I didn't turn the lights off until the sun came up. The east wing is still there. The cables are cut. The phone system has been disconnected. Everything that could be done has been done within the limits of what the system allows. But I think the thing about systems is that they only control what they're designed to control. And whatever was reaching out from the east wing, whatever was breathing and tapping and calling from a phone that no longer existed on a line that was no longer connected. It wasn't using the phone system because it needed the phone system. It was using the phone system because that was the language it knew. That was the only way it had ever been taught to ask for help. Press the call button, pick up the phone, wait for someone to answer. And when they cut the wires, when they removed the cables, when they sealed every connection between that wing and the rest of the building, I don't think they stopped it. I think they just made it harder to hear. I think it's still calling. I think it's been calling for 10 years. I think it will keep calling in whatever way it can, through whatever system it can reach, until someone finally answers in a way that matters. I just don't know what that would look like. And I'm not sure I want to find out. Some nights at home, in the quiet of my apartment, I'll be half asleep and I'll hear a phone ringing somewhere. Far away. Faint. The old kind of ring, the mechanical bell, not the electronic chirp. And I'll lie there in the dark and listen, and it will ring 3 or 4 times, and then it will stop. It's probably a neighbor. It's probably a dream. It's probably nothing. I don't check anymore. I just lie there and wait for it to stop. And eventually it does. And I close my eyes. And I try not to think about a woman in room 212, pressing a button over and over again in the dark, waiting for someone to come. And the phone at the nurse station picking itself up, and the line connecting, and the breathing, and the silence. On the other end where help should have been. I try not to think about that. But I do. Most nights, I do. And the east wing is still there. Still closed. Still dark. Still part of the building. Still, I think, waiting.